So I will spend most of the time going through the TKO stuff on Thursday with Brandon, but just some keynotes coming out of it. The most noteworthy thing is that they did announce a short-term extension of Raw on the USA Network for the fourth quarter of the year, where Raw did not have a home for these final 3 months of the year. The current deal with NBC Universal expires September 30th, so they have agreed to a 3-month extension for $25 million, which, based on the average annual value of this existing deal, NBC Universal is saving like $40 million of like what these 3 months are worth. So to me, it's a steal for NBC Universal to have, it is going to be during football season. So this is not going to be the number one program on cable Monday nights, but it's still going to perform very well. And I am curious if this kind of hometown discount for a broadcaster that you are staying in business with through SmackDown and of course through Peacock, I wonder if this will give an allowance that they can actively promote Raw moving to Netflix as maybe something they've carved out for themselves, that, hey, we're giving you this great deal. But it also makes you wonder, how were there any other interested parties to take a lame duck show for 3 months that you're not building your programming around? It would just be for 3 months, because I just see these 3 months of programming are worth a whole lot more than $25 million given the current economy.
Sure, absolutely. Although, like, even if you're the WWE, this is probably the best case scenario, other than maybe an earlier move to Netflix. But maybe
you do not want to promote another place to send your audience to, and then have to do that again in 3 months for Netflix.
For 3 months, exactly. So I think the leverage was, in this case, probably on USA side, and you judge, by the value that they seem to gain from out of this deal. It probably was up to their own negotiation about whether or not they wanted to accept and for what price. So even if like a more lucrative offer might have appeared for the WWE, this is probably still their preferred option, I have to think.
They reported net revenues between the UFC and WWE of $629.7 million, but a net loss for the quarter of $249.5 million. A huge expense was for the UFC antitrust settlement, which they announced are going to be split into 3 payouts, with the first one being $100 million this quarter, another $100 million in the fourth quarter of 2024, and then the final sum of $135 million in the second quarter of next year. And they pretty much stated on the call that this settlement is not going to affect the way they do business, because there had been the question of were there other details that they negotiated, such as any changes to contracts or any of that. It sounds like this is pure cash that they are spending, with a $335 million settlement for the 2 antitrust suits that were filed. And it's a big weight off the shoulder of TKO for their investors, that this was of a concern of, if this went to court, of what the fee could be. $335 million, not anything to sneeze at, but a very manageable figure for this company overall. But that was a key reason of a big expense that they had. And beyond that, they mentioned the fact that WrestleMania in Vegas, it's tied to both cash and non-cash incentives. So probably getting a nice amount, and maybe some,
tax breaks, whatever, like things like that.
I was going to say maybe like free chips for the table, just unlimited drinks, that kind of thing.
What's the value of the drinks, I wonder?
In Vegas, that can go for a premium. And UFC's domestic television rights, the negotiating window will begin in January. So we're still quite a ways away before UFC can take in outside offers. They've already mentioned that there are multiple parties interested, and those are going to be significant rights. But it is so hard to predict where the television landscape will be in 6 months when they're looking here. But they seem to be in pretty good shape. And one of the theories I've heard thrown out there is the idea, if Warner Brothers Discovery loses the NBA, do they make a play for the UFC? Like, there's all these options that are out there.
That would be interesting. And let's say AEW stays on Warner.
Very possible. Very possible. And I mean, would Max be a place that they would want to house these pay-per-views? you lose the NBA and it's a big hit to your profile and potentially your carriage fees, but you have all this money that you are saving as a result of it that you could bid really high for something like the UFC rights. There's the Netflix component with the UFC. Like there's all these options that it's very hard to predict, but I think the UFC, like you just look, the NBA is about to jump to something like $7 billion a year they're going to get in these next rounds of negotiations. And the UFC is not the NBA, but the UFC is, I think they're poised for something very strong. I would be most confident of them of AEW, WWE, and UFC. I think the UFC is best positioned, but we will see what happens there.